Marilyn and I'm the archive manager here at the Feilding and Districts Community Archive. What we collect is in our name. It's got to be part of Feilding, it's got to be part of the districts, that's the wider Vanuatu area, and it's got to be community.
What kind of things are held here?
Well, Feilding, we have a lot of information that came from the council originally. Back in the early 2000s, there was a central government decree that councils had to focus on collecting council records. And so over the years they'd collected quite a bit of community records, and so when we set up here they were rather pleased, and so we got a lot of history that came from the council. So things like CWIs, when they were called Country Women's Institutes, some school records came through. A lot of the smaller schools closed down, and so the records were sent into the council as well. Now, there's a person who was a councillor at the time, Tui Mayo, who was also the first chairperson of the Old Pupils Association of Feilding Agricultural High School. And she has always been a history buff, and she made it quite dedicated part of her council work to capture this material and make sure that it was held. And so we're very grateful to Tui for doing that work. And as well as which, she was responsible for a lot of the history being collated and retained by the high school.
So in regards to the high school, as you said, you do hold quite a lot of information here next to Tui. So what sort of information do you have?
Right, we have a range here. I've got some boxes I've pulled out. This one here is student work on the farm, because you have to remember that this high school was Feilding Agricultural High School, and L.J. Wild, the more I look at these records, the more I am in awe of that guy. He was just fantastic. He could see the need for farming students who were coming to the high school were going to go back to the farm, and therefore, as well as having a general all-round English, maths, history taught, they also needed to be taught good, sound agricultural knowledge. And so he got in league, they call them the Big Four. There's Mr. Knight, who had the Kiwatia stud farm up Kimbolton Road. There was Mr. Tolley from Hodder and Tolley, agricultural based firm. There was Mr. Booth, Hector Booth. He actually started out, he was the first carrier who used to cart the sceptres when they arrived from 1874 onwards from Palmerston North to Feilding, and he was very agricultural based. And then of course there was L.J. Wild.
Interesting that you've managed to create a picture of that man through the information that you have, and that must be something magical that kind of happens here, is taking what could possibly be sometimes quite boring everyday sort of information and creating a picture. So tell me about how you come about creating a picture from the information that you've got.
I think it was the second year commemoration. L.J. Wild always ensured there was a guest speaker, and the second one I think it was Sir Peter Buck came and talked, and I'm thinking, wow, how did L.J. Wild possibly know Sir Peter Buck? And looking through the pictures, because we've got a box here, Mr. Wild's papers, and he left behind, or to the high school, his student papers of when he was a tertiary student at Otago University. And there's one in the pictures. We've got boxes and boxes of pictures have come from the high school. Here's a picture of, I think it was about 1908 from memory, might have been 1911, the graduates for that year. And here's L.J. Wild sitting down the front, and it was about 4 tiers with quite a few students. And lo and behold, there's Peter Buck. And so there he was, a student with him, so he used his connections. So finding moments like that, it's fantastic. Okay, so with the internet these days, people are cannot always come in to the archive, and we get international requests for information as well as research queries from within New Zealand. And I've got one here, and it's wanting to know information on a student called Naidera. And can you see if you can find any information? So we have a box somewhere. These are the student cards that have recently come in. So these all get reboxed and checked. So I've gone to the N file and I have to see if I can find a NIDA. Each student that went to the high school, there's different formats. They got a card. Here we go, LE, no, that's the right one, yes. And so we open it up and it's got surname and Christian names. This person was born in 1953, and so they were admitted to high school second term in 1968, and so they were in the schoolhouse, so that meant they were not a boarder. And they were a boarder because their parents at the time lived in Tauranga, and so this has got his record of what he did, how long he was there. Works well, did metal work and animal husbandry, and farm management, general science, social studies. So this is the whole record of that student, the time they were at school. And they got some jolly good marks too, not too bad, 20 out of 23 for farm management.
And so what are the earliest records from the high school?
Oh, they go right back from 1920 when the school first started. So we've got all the information. So I can now put that information and reply to the person who asked to see the query about that person. Sometimes it could be researching a relative and they're not quite sure what years they attended. And these are brilliant because, like I've just said, that's got to the names of the parents and where that person lived, and if they were a boarder, which that person was. So society changes all the time, and what might have set one generations of students way back, that was probably very much more formal and discipline-wise. There was corporal punishment, and then you went to school because you were either going to go back onto the farm, or you were going to go maybe into a secretarial job, or maybe if you were a little more focused, you might be going to nursing. So there was a limit of what you could do going on from school in those days. And then moving on, the war years, students having to cope with what was happening internationally must have impacted on the students during that time in the 1940s. I may be somewhat surprised to receive this letter, but I can assure you that there are plenty of times when I think of you in the old school and recall with pleasure time spent in Feilding. I can remember one of your little addresses in morning assembly when you read extracts from a book by Beverly Nichols. I think that was the author, and it was reminding me of the international crises which finally led up to this war. And then moving on, the 50s and the 60s, things were starting to change. They were a little less formal, but there was still that you only went to school till you were 15, and then once you got to 15, probably half the school left. I'm talking a little bit here about my own personal experience, and by the 1960s, I would say, I think we used to have two year 12 classes for a school that was a population equivalent to Feilding. It was a huge school, it was 1,500 students, and yet by the time you got to year 13, there were only probably 50 students going on and doing anything above school certificate. Yeah. So things have changed very much there. Now the students are encouraged to stay at school for as long as possible, to be an 18-year-old and still at school in the 70s even was an exception. Most students had gone on to other things and other training. So the emphasis is these days to have a higher level of skills because you're looking at more professional outcome for employment and how important it is to gain as much as you can in those secondary school years.
Did you go to Feilding High School?
No, I didn't, but my 3 children did.
Right, okay.
So, the other thing we have here, there's someone who stands out straight away. This must be Star Photographs. Doug Thorley, I remember him well. Because I taught at high school.
Yeah, so what did you teach?
Well, I did night school for 24 years. And also, I was the itinerant cello teacher. The cello teacher was unwell for most of 1 year, so I was the cello teacher. There is Scott, there. People are going to remember who. Isn't that nice? I pulled out all the really important, one of the important parts of the high school, and that's the teachers. I think school days are a really important part of anyone's life. They're very formative, and the experiences going there and the friendships are going to continue for the rest of their lives. So having a good basic education in a supportive environment is so important. So it's fantastic, the collaboration between the OPA and the high school and this museum and archive, in that all this history of the high school will be retained, and we're having a special display for the commemoration, and it will highlight uniforms through decades, and also a lot of this information is going to be out on display so people can come and view.